Hello, welcome to section 3.2, Women's Spaces, from the book Transgender Ideology and Gender Dysphoria, A Catholic Response. I'm Jake Thibault, doing this presentation. So we are moving into the next part of culture, which is, again, women's spaces. So this is perhaps the most contentious one. Hopefully up until this point, chapter 2, talking about sex and gender, the two different ways of looking at it, the three various ways of having gender theory, looking at epistemology, the two different approaches to it. In some ways you might be upset at what was said, but if I present both sides of every argument, then you can only be so mad at that I'm presenting both sides. Haven't really gotten into anything controversial yet. This section here starts the controversial section, right? So now people can start to get mad. But hopefully what I'm going to try to do is just present the arguments, and I'm going to be presenting both sides, and I'm going to be aiming at a moderate, down the middle approach to this. Well, clearly that upsets people who are very passionate about this issue on both sides, right? So I am essentially going to alienate everyone. But the goal of this is to aim at a moderate approach that tries to find practical solutions for everyone while being faithful to a Catholic cosmology, sacramental theology, and ethics. So, I'm trying to be sympathetic to everyone and be as realistic about this, right? I'm trying to be a realist about this and not an ideologue, right? That's kind of the goal. As pointed out last time, Pope Francis was promoting for more social friendships, right? This is hopefully the goal of this work is to kind of build bridges between both sides. You might be more on one side than the other, but I think it's very important for you to understand both sides, right? If you don't understand the other side, then they're just, crazy, right? That's our approach. If you don't agree with me, you're crazy. Well, sometimes there's people who disagree with us, and there's a good reason why they disagree with us. Now, you can still disagree, but it's important to know why you disagree. And maybe there's more room for middle ground for both sides, so I don't suspect that you're watching this video, but perhaps it'll help the conversation eventually. So when we're looking at women's only spaces, this is just historically different than men's only spaces, right? If we look at the history of civilization, all spaces in some ways were men only spaces. Women have only recently been able to, kind of have full access to public spaces, which is why some spaces have been designated for women only. Women could have always, in a sense, used the men's restroom, 100 years ago, but they risked being assaulted, or with all of the layers of cloth and material and things, it would have been very difficult before. So the creation of women-only spaces was really important historically for giving women access to the public realm, right? If a woman could go out and actually be able to use the restroom safely, it meant she actually had access to the public sphere, right? The public realm, which was very important for women. And so, Men didn't really need those extra accommodations. They kind of could do whatever they want. So it's just important to remember the context of how these spaces were created and why they were created, and some of the arguments for why they still need to be there. So some of the things that are important to include within this section, kind of vocab, ideas to talk about. Gatekeeping is a big one. Who determines who's male or female? If you were to say, well, I'm a transgender male or a transgender female, is it just simply, moving into the next one, SelfID, right? Is this just, if I say I am, then I am, right? This goes back to chapter 2, right? biological, the personal, or the social gender theory, right? Is this just all personal? If I say I'm a woman, or do women have to accept me as one of them, right? For me to be allowed in one of their spaces? This is an important question. And again, this SelfID also just ties in with gatekeeping, right? Who determines if you are really a woman and given access to women-only spaces? Again, typically people aren't pushing to get themselves into men-only spaces, and men typically don't care because, well, there's not much of a... Women don't threaten men much, but men tend to threaten women a lot, considering rape and other issues publicly. And also, does a person have to socially transition, and do they have to pass a certain gender expression before they're received as a member of the sex? Again, this is very close to, just that debate over the personal gender theory, social gender theory, biological gender theory. If you have questions about this, go back to gender theory back in chapter 2 to kind of clear up those distinctions. So we're going to look at the bathroom or locker room debate. We're going to look at the prison debate, and we're going to look at the sports debate. So those are the three areas we're looking at for women-only spaces. So the first one is the bathroom one, which I think was brought up first, kind of chronologically out of these issues. And I think for the average, kind of non-ideologue in the world, right, in the Western world, our thought was, who cares where somebody goes to the bathroom? I tend to think, as a male within our Western society, when this came up, before doing any research or reading, or, I knew some transgender people, and I would think, well, I would want them to use whatever makes them feel comfortable, and, we're talking about going to the bathroom, so this doesn't seem like this should really be an issue. Why are they making such a big issue out of this? It's probably where most people stood. I think statistically this is where most people stood. Like, why are you picking on these poor transgender people, right? This is a fair enough question, right? And also the thought that far more transgender people are attacked or assaulted than non-transgender people are assaulted by transgender people, right? So if anybody needed the protections, it was probably transgender people, not the non-transgender people, when it comes to spaces like this. And this is still, I think, a very important framing to keep in mind, when you're saying, well, I'm very concerned about the safety of children in restrooms, and we should be, but we should also be very concerned about transgender people not being murdered as well, right? This is why this is we need a middle path to this approach, right? You really do have to consider both sides of this. Now, things like the bathroom are perhaps less of an issue under this topic than something like the locker room, right? Because when it comes to bathrooms, if you go into your stall and close the door, even in a public bathroom, you have a good amount of privacy in there. And if you're out in the public area, in a public bathroom, you're usually clothed, right? I haven't spent much time in women's rooms, but I imagine most women are clothed, because in men's room, most men are clothed in the public area. But locker rooms are a bit different, right? Locker rooms is where people change. They take off their clothes. And there's kind of a history of predatory behavior in locker rooms, or cruising, or voyeurism, exhibitionism within public locker rooms. So I think that's probably the bigger debate, and the same thing where people who are very interested in this topic would be schools, right? School-aged people. If you are going to a gym, right, you go to Planet Fitness, well, you're at a private institution. You're choosing to go there. You can get dressed at home. You could get dressed there. If you don't like their policies, you could go to a different gym that had a different set of policies. So it's less concerning for full-fledged adults, again,
But for high school students, right? You don't choose gym, right? You don't choose to necessarily do this. It could be more of an issue at certain ages than others. So just something to keep in mind. When the North Carolina House bill passed in 2016 and this became a big thing, one of the reasons why it was a big thing was because it was affecting schools, right? It was any government public facility was affected. But we weren't really talking about, this really was an issue for the public bathroom at the town hall, right? That's not really the issue. It was schools, right? It was schools. But the law they put in there said, you just have to follow your birth certificate. Now, again, this is a bit of a challenge because, people could say, well, you just, if you're transgender, change your birth certificate, and then once you're legally a member of that sex, then you can go into the public restroom. It doesn't bar transgender people from public facilities. It just says you have to follow your birth certificate, and if you can legally change your birth certificate, then do that. Well, this would probably be fine for most adults, right? But how about high school students, right? High school students are not changing their birth certificates while 14 years old to reflect the opposite sex. And we really don't want to encourage 14-year-olds to make, rash decisions with changing their birth certificates. At 14, 13, they should, if they're trying to figure it out, let them figure it out, right? The wait and see approach might be better, right? Than saying, well, if you're 13 and you're transgender, go and change your birth certificate, right? I'm trying to play a moderate approach and challenge both sides on this. So if you're saying, well, the law is perfectly reasonable, change your birth certificate. Well, it is still a bit of an issue when it comes to that. But I think there is a good, for people who think I'm on their side, now I'm going to be against you. When you look at the lawyer's response to House Bill 2, when it had a public hearing, Jeff Schaefer, he said, transgender ideology instructs that the body does not reveal the person, the mind does, except that the mind is invisible, and so reveals nothing. While aiming to replace sex with gender identity, Gavin, the plaintiff, insists on access to the male facilities that exist only because the public acknowledges the meaningfulness of the bodies that she denies have meaning. Her novel theory of identity and her claim for restroom access are mutually refuting. So this is very... people might not like it, but it is a fairly good point. Right? It's a very good point. Why do we have these two bathrooms? Is it because of gender or because of sex? It's because of the physical sex that's different of the people. But she's saying that, the plaintiff, the young trans person identified as Gavin, is saying that sex doesn't matter. Her gender matters, right? His gender matters more than anything, right? If you're saying my sex is female, but my gender is male, and that's what matters. My gender is male. But the whole point of the bathroom is for sex, not gender, right? So that's the argument. And I think that's a fairly good argument. And this is, again, to kind of point it out, and I use this term a lot within my book, the phenomenal is the external, right, outside of the mind, right? If you go back to epistemology that we covered already, right? The body is the phenomenal, the noumenal is the mind, right? The intangible is the noumenal. If we were to say, well, why do we have men and women's rooms? Is because of your internal mind that we have men's room and women's room, because men and women have different minds? No, of course not. Right? We don't have separate facilities because our minds are different. in that regard, we should have men's and women's segregated libraries, right? If we're separating it because of the mind, we're separating the sexes because of the sex, right? This is men's room, women's room. Is not a gender distinction, it's a sex distinction. The question is, what is your anatomy, right? And the purpose for this is not really to protect the men from the women, it's to protect the women from the men. And the very much higher rates of rape of women than men. If you were a woman who had been raped by a man, Posey Parker points out when women go into restrooms, there's a greater degree of undress than men. Men we can unzip and be done in a minute. If you look outside the line of a public bathroom for men and a public bathroom for women, men typically have no waiting time, and women have very long lines for the bathroom. Why? It's more complicated for women, right? There's a greater degree of undress. Their clothes are more complicated, and there's, and women have, periods and things where takes more time, right? They are undressed in a more complicated way, and they're undressed longer. And if you've experienced trauma from sexual abuse of men, when you're mostly undressed, right, and in a compromised state, you would not want to have men around, right? That's the principle that many feminists make. And it's not because they feel threatened by the mind of that person. It's not the mind that's threatening them. It's the body, right? It's the penis. It's the muscles. It's the facial hair. It's the masculine aspects of the male, which makes them feel intimidated and nervous, right? So if somebody like this person here were to say, well, so if you would have this person here say, well, I'm just kind of non-binary, like I feel male and I feel female, and I kind of identify as both male and female, so I can just go in the women's room or the men's room, right? Whatever I feel like, so I have breasts, so I'm female, but have facial hair, so I'm a male, long hair, so I'm a female. Right, so it's a non-binary person. Well, first, if he goes into the men's room, he does, if there's some violent, drunk group of young guys and they see this woman with a beard in there, this person is in danger. At the same time, going into the women's room, a woman who might not want to be getting undressed, with somebody with a beard and a penis standing next to them. And this is true in the bathroom, but even more so in a locker room, right? In a locker room, do you want to be getting undressed with a person who has a beard standing next to you, right? It's not even that the person is, their chromosomes are XY. It's that the person literally has a penis and a beard, right? The person appears quite male, but not quite male enough to pass as fully male in a men's room. So this person, in order to say, well, I like to express myself, right? I don't want to be put into a box. They really have made a situation very dangerous for them and very uncomfortable for everyone else. If I were to turn to some of the Thomism there, I would say, as social beings, we are trying to be good neighbors to one another. To do something where you say, well, I'm going to make myself comfortable. Well, if the thing that makes you comfortable really annoys everybody else, there's a point where that's no longer being a good member of the Commonwealth, right? If I said, well, I feel most comfortable naked, so I'm just going to be out in public naked. Well, my comfort is very nice, but I do have to consider the comfort of other people, right? I know that seems like a really foreign concept to us as Americans, is this idea that I have to be concerned about the comfort of other people, right? No, I don't have to go, to a crazy degree to accommodate other people, but when you can very foreseeably notice that something might upset other people, it's better not to, right? To be a good member of the Commonwealth, it's better not to. This could be a good debate, right? A good topic for discussion if you ever want to talk about this with somebody. Add that to the list of good topics. Okay, the next one is, the problem with self-ID. This is, again, we're still in the bathroom public facility issue, is that we have increasing amounts of laws, in Ireland and other places, but even within some states within the United States, where we're trying to pass this idea of self-ID. If I identify as a man or a woman, that's what I am. Right? This is personal gender theory, right? Why we covered this in chapter 2. This is personal gender theory. I don't have to do anything to fit in. I just say that I am, and I am. Right? Well, what's the problem with self-ID? Well, one, if you get rid of self-ID and you create gatekeeping, right? Back to gatekeeping, it doesn't solve all the problems. Gatekeeping doesn't solve all the problems, but it does solve some, right? It might be a middle path, is some type of gatekeeping against self-ID. So, what was the gatekeeping with the North Carolina bill? Well, the gatekeeping in the North Carolina bill was you need to use the bathroom of your birth certificate. And if you're transgender, you could change your birth certificate to match what you said. But it means you've had to made a commitment of some kind, right? There actually has to be a commitment, at least a legal commitment, right? That's one thing. It doesn't mean that you have to socially transition, right? It doesn't mean that you have to, if you say you're a woman, doesn't mean you have to wear makeup, doesn't mean you have to have long hair, doesn't mean you have to wear women's clothes. You could still have a beard, right? But at least you did something, right? You took a legal step at the very least. So that's one. That was a gatekeeping we already looked at. Here's where there's no gatekeeping. So this person I was very careful in the book. I didn't want to go put pictures of some of these people because I thought, an artist taking time to draw this person and put it in there, it might just be mocking, right? It just might be mocking and making fun of people who have problems. And in text, you don't always have the context. So I'm hoping in video, I can give perhaps a bit more context. And, I think it is different than illustrating someone. But anyway, so the first person, maybe I've gone too far. If I did, feel free to say, but I'm going to try not to. I'm not trying to pick on anyone. But people like this in the bottom left, the Shauna or Sean Patrick Smith, he was in a Target bathroom and taking pictures of 18-year-old girls changing, claiming he was transgender. But as you can see from the picture, there's been no legal steps to transition. There has been no social steps to transition. He appears in every way male, right? If you look at the pictures of the court case at the hearings, he's wearing a shirt and a tie with a male typical haircut like he has here. There is nothing about him which appears feminine, right? So to claim to be transgender under self-ID, right? Well, I feel like I'm a woman, so I'm going to go in the bathroom and take pictures of young girls. Well, that's why gatekeeping would be helpful, because this person is probably not transgender, right? They're probably maybe transgender in ideology, but certainly not gender dysphoric, right? And this is why this is a distinction. This person does not claim any type of intersex brain. There is no sense of real gender dysphoria. Maybe the person has generalized dysphoria or mental illness, but they are not gender dysphoric. And people from the transgender community who believe that they are gender dysphoric have been diagnosed gender dysphoric want to distance themselves from people like this Sean Patrick, right? They want to say, we're not like these people who just say that they're transgender to prey upon girls in the bathroom, right? This is, we're not like them, right? So, and here I am echoing that. He's not like this person is not this person is not gender dysphoric. If the church or people within society say we need gatekeeping to keep people like that out, well, society probably agrees with that, and real transgender people should as well. Why? Because you don't want to be lumped in with people like him. He's has some problems, but he's not representing the transgender community well. Another person is a Luke here in the middle, who's very activist, very active in Hollywood with convincing actors and actresses to come out as non-binary, very popular, right? He's a very popular social person as non-binary. But you can see very clearly with the big hairy chest and armpits and and the beard, you can quite clearly tell he's male. But then with the dress and the fingernails and the makeup and the jewelry, gender bending, right? He's gender bending. The person is homosexual. This person was probably heterosexual and a sex offender. This person is homosexual and gender bending, but that's not why he's on the sheet. Because he releases things that say things like that the narrative that transgender people will come into bathrooms and abuse little girls. This supposed purity of the victims has remained stagnant. There are no fairy tales and no princesses here. Little girls are trans, queer, kinky, devious, mean, beautiful, ugly, tremendous, and peculiar. So calling young minor girls kinky who might be kind of into trans people in the bathroom does not go over well. I don't know. It should not go over well. But there's been, I think there was a Republican who criticized a Luke's statement on Twitter, and the politician was banned for being transphobic, even though a Luke is saying that young girls are kinky. Apparently young girls can be kinky, and that's fine, but if you criticize somebody who says that young girls are kinky, you're transphobic. Even though the person is not gender dysphoric, they appear to be gender bending homosexual. That's not to be mean. It's just realism, right? It's just a real observation. Once you break down, if you say that these personal gender theories, they're just not real, right? If you're coming at this from a biological gender theory, like I do, like Thomism does, then I can make a judgment, right? A judgment on it, that on the philosophy that the person is not gender dysphoric, unless a medical professional can point that out. But from all of his activism, he clearly seems to be transgender from an activist perspective, right? Which is the type of transgender, the activist transgender theory. Might regret saying all of that, but I think that I have to speak frankly, right? And I don't mean that as an insult. Lastly, Jessica Yaniv down here is Canadian, male to female, but Yaniv, I believe, has now had surgery. Who knows if that's true or not? But she has young girls and teens and people on a lot of social media, and talks about periods and sexual things to just children on social media, which is disturbing on its own. Yaniv has tried to sue waxing services, women who wax people for a living. There's some waxing services, I guess, this is all new to me, but they're women, and they only do this for women, right? And they might even perform the service in a person's house, one-on-one or something like this. And Yaniv has male genitalia, at least at the time, and wanted her male genitalia waxed. And the waxer says, well, I only do this for women. I don't do this on men. I wouldn't even know how to wax male genitalia. So Yaniv sued the person and got that person thrown out of business because they said, well, you're discriminating against me because I'm trans. The woman said, I'm not anti-trans. I'm just don't know how to wax male genitalia. I'm a female esthetician, right? And it has since gone to court, and the judge has thrown it out. But Yaniv loves to sue people. And right after Yaniv went and got her paperwork legally changed to say that she was a woman without any transitioning, walks into a public bathroom and starts taking pictures of teenage girls, like with no transition at all. So there was some gatekeeping there, but it did nothing, right? And Yaniv has set up things. She likes to ask teenage girls, puberty age, do you need help with your tampons or something like this? Like, she has no experience with tampons. She's a male, right? Biologically male. She does not have a period. And Yaniv has attempted to host all-body swim parties, a topless event for 12 and up, where parents were excluded. She wants to run a topless thing where young girls come topless to the pool and their parents aren't there. Predator. This is a predatory behavior, and Yaniv has had run-ins with the law. So again, if we just look at just on this SelfID list, right, we have this person who is probably heterosexual, this person who's homosexual, and this person who is heterosexual. So this is not a gay issue, right? It's not a gay issue, but it is an issue where we're just basically allowing anyone to identify as whatever they want, and there can be problems. It's not to say there aren't cisgender predators too, quite a few, right? But we need to have some moderation, right? I know I moved on to this next slide, but with these accommodations, has there been a transition in some way? If Posey Parker points out that no matter what, if a man who's transgender comes in, so a female transgender person comes in, they're not welcome because it's a women's only space and they're biologically not women. And that's it. But realistically, right, if a person fully passes socially as a woman, right, they are socially otherwise appear to be a woman, and they go into a public bathroom and close the door, there's no stress on the rest of the female community because they have passed socially as a woman, right? There is a level of passing, right? I guess the same thing with the locker room, right? If you have had surgeries and you are convincingly a female and women accept you as a female, right? You can still be discreet if not everything has been done, but the issue of passing matters within some of these debates, right? There's some opponents to these bathroom bills because they'll come in and they have very successfully transitioned socially, right? Somebody female to male, and they have facial hair and they muscles and everything. They look more manly than I do, and they go, "Do you really want me in a woman's room?" Well, the answer is clearly no, right? They socially pass as a man. They probably should socially be in a men's room, because if they were in a woman's room and women have been raped and they are afraid of being undressed in front of men, well, if this female to male person is in there and they look clearly like a man, that might be triggering for the female who had been raped by a man, even though you could say, well, the person was born a woman. Well, who knows that? Nobody knows that, right? The same thing is if a person is male to female and they are very convincingly a female, the most appropriate place for them within the bathroom would be the female bathroom, because if socially they can be accepted as a member of that sex, right? Right? If they can be socially a member of that sex, then they have approach the female gender from a social perspective. I know that some people will not like that perspective, but I think that's a reasonable perspective. The other thing is that you could have single use rooms, right? At the very beginning of this, we say, well, it can set up a separate room for people who don't fit in either category, right? And that seems quite reasonable. It could also be, if you were a woman who had experienced rape and you don't want to be around other people, well, then you could go in the room, right? If you don't like what's going on. The option of people having privacy seems to be a good middle ground. It might be an expensive middle ground. That's the problem. But I think the idea has been almost abandoned because the activist community has responded that separate but equal is never equal. So if you had a special trans bathroom, then you're not treating them really as women. And if you don't treat me as a biological full natal woman, you are oppressing me, you are erasing me, you are invalidating my identity, etc., etc. Although it seems like the rational thing would be, just be aware that you might make people uncomfortable. And you don't want to do that to innocent people who've done nothing wrong to you. What do you have against that woman who feels very uncomfortable by it? Just good social etiquette is not to make other people uncomfortable, right? Back to Pope Francis's social friendship, right? This idea that we should try to, make people comfortable. And I think there are a lot of transgender people, a lot of people with gender dysphoria in particular, who are just trying to survive. They're just trying to use the bathroom, right? They're just trying to go to the gym. They don't want to show their genitalia off to anyone, right? They're trying to, in some sense, hide. They're trying to sneak into the sex that gender, and they're not looking for any attention. That is the majority of gender dysphoric people. The people who end up creating a lot of the issues are more gender theorists, right? Gender theorists can be, or the mentally ill, right? Mentally ill or gender theorists can create the biggest problems. So I think it's very important from a Catholic perspective that we don't lump everyone in together, because, it's not all the same, right? Transgender is an umbrella, therefore we don't treat everyone under the umbrella the same. What do you do when you get to youth, like Catholic school? That's a whole nother issue, which I will get to in chapter 9 when we get to youth. It's a tough one, right? That's a tough one. But we'll get to that in chapter 9. Okay, next, the prison debate. Now, this one is probably the newest that's on the radar, but one of the most egregious of anything, right? You can just choose not to go into a locker room. You can choose not to go into a public restroom, or even if you do, and you don't want to be undressed around men, good chance you're not going to see any. Good chance you can just get in and out and don't worry about it too much, right? The prison debate, now that's a tougher one, right? So you have somebody like this Karen Stephen Wood, call him Stephen, call him Karen. In my book I call them Stephen, because I tend to think that the person is mentally ill and criminally insane. Therefore, I don't want to really validate that he is Karen White and associate him with transgender people, because I don't think transgender people want me to associate him with them, and I think that's accurate. So he was convicted of raping women, and here he is in the bottom. This is as a male and as a female. The only change between male and female is the wig and maybe a little bit of makeup, but not much. Right? A little bit of makeup and a wig. So again, gatekeeping might help, maybe. But he was convicted of raping women, and this is in the UK. And the High Court, and they put him in prison with women. So he says, well, I'm a woman. So then they put him in the women's prison, where he raped 2 women while he was in the women's prison. which is very foreseeable, right? A rapist would rape people. Well, quite obvious. Now, this also raises an important point of self-ID, right? If all you have to do is say is, "Oh, I'm a woman," what man who's arrested would choose if you just said, for every man who's sentenced to prison, you go, "Do you want to go to the men's prison or the women's prison?" How many men would choose to go to the men's prison, right? Right, transgender or not, right? Would you rather be with women or with men? Well, given my size and everything, I would much more prefer to be in a women's prison than a men's prison, right? I would not be able to defend myself at all in a men's prison. In a women's prison, well, I might be able to hold my own anyway, right? Who wants to be in a men's prison, right? It sounds awful. Nobody wants to be in prison in general, but men's prisons are filled with violent criminals, right? Women's prisons are typically less filled with violent criminals. The judge ruled that, you're a threat to society, you're a threat to women, you're a threat to children. I don't know how the law has gone this way of calling you a woman, but we're not going to follow through. Now he's in a men's prison. But in the complaint that was raised against him after he raped 2 women in jail, they pointed out that the majority of female prisoners are victims of domestic violence. 57% of emotional, physical, or sexual abuse during childhood. 53%. A lot of women who are in jail because it was a guy and girl team, right? They were drug dealers together, or something like that. A lot of them were also abused in an abusive relationship, but they really weren't as free. Women very rarely are convicted of violent crimes. It's usually drug or prostitution related. In the year ending March 2017, victims of those convicted of rape or assault by penetration reported that 99% of those offenders were male and 1% female. So most women who were raped, who are in jail, were raped by men. And of the 125 transgender prisoners in 2017, 60, which was 48%, had been convicted of sexual offenses. Of those 27, 45% had been convicted of rape. So if you're saying, the 125 transgender people that they have now put in women's prisons, half of them are rapists. So you're putting male rapists in women's prisons. How could that go wrong? Now you can see that this is clearly a problem, right? This is a problem. Again, with self-ID, you have people like Alejandro Gentili, and this is in Ireland, who goes by Barbie Kardashian. The person had a long pattern of abuse against women, from foster home to group homes to everything else. The person had a terrible upbringing, but a theme consistent throughout the teenage years has been violence towards women. Now, this Barbie or Alejandro came out as transgender. A therapist saw her and determined that she was not gender dysphoric, kind of saying not really transgender. You can say you're transgender, but don't have any diagnosis for transgender. The person was clearly violent and dangerous, but once she hit 17, they didn't have the legal recourse to keep her in jail, in like a youth group home any longer, like a lockdown group home. They said, we got to release, until you do a crime, we can't keep you and you can't lock you up once you're 18. But they go, we know where this is going to end. Somebody's going to get hurt. And turned 18 and immediately assaulted 2 women. So she goes to the women's prison because she identifies as a woman. Also in Ireland, they have laws that say that you cannot call somebody by the opposite gender. So the newspapers all report Barbie Kardashian as a female, that it would be illegal for them to identify her as trans or as a male. And Barbie is very dangerous to women. This is one of these things that really upsets people. Just looking at the picture, you go, how are you putting this dangerous person, even at a young age, a long history of violence towards women, how would you put this person in a women's prison? Right? It's gone too far. Now, on the opposite side of this, again, trying to hit the middle path, if you were to put a transgender person who has transitioned, right, a transitioned transgender person who has a convincing gender expression consistent with their identity, this would be very dangerous to put them in their natal sex environment, right? If you had a man, let's say, who identifies as a woman and has had transgender surgery, is on the hormones, has gone all of the way as far as they can go to be a woman, if you were to put that person in a men's prison, you'd be setting that person up to be raped nonstop. And this is what happened in Georgia. This inmate, Ashley Diamond, she was allegedly raped 14 times by male inmates and correctional officers. And this was a case from 2020. These men have no access to women, and here you have somebody who looks very much like a woman. Within the first 24 hours of this person being in prison, they were raped by their cellmate, right? And this is very dangerous, right? The person might have committed a crime. It doesn't mean they should be raped every day for the rest of their prison sentence, right? This should not occur. There needs to be some type of protection of transgender people in prison, right? Part of the sentence isn't to be raped. That's not in the sentence. So as much as it is expensive, and I think, I've listened to enough people debate this topic, I agree with the majority of people with gender dysphoria who talk about this, who are pretty moderate. It's like, as much as it would be expensive to create more facilities, it seems as if you would need a jail that can accommodate transgender people. Could be a wing, could be something else. Maybe you only need one for the entire country of the United States, right? We have a lot of people in prison. One wing of one of the prisons dedicated to people who are male to female, and another wing dedicated to people female to male. And you also have to take into consideration self-ID versus non-self-ID, right? Is the person truly gender dysphoric, and have they made steps to transition? Have they transitioned, right? Have they taken on the opposite sexual expression? If they did, put them in the appropriate facility. As much as, some people might, from a very conservative perspective, go, well, that's too bad. That's too bad. We can't have people raped, right? You don't know if the person is engaging in ideology. You don't know if the person is gender dysphoric. You don't know if the person has mental illness. You don't know if the person had got caught up in something, right? We don't know, and we don't want to make a blanket statement about this. And you can't have people getting raped, right? So even if it did cost more money, unfortunately, we waste a lot of money to save somebody from being violently raped every day for the next 10 years. Seems to be worth it, right? If the person's on for a drug offense or something like that, the person's a drug addict, and here they are getting raped now. How is that Christ-like to have the person, punish them and have them raped and everything else, right? We don't want to go down that road. The last one is the sports debate. Now, this one is also very heavily politicized, more talked about than the prison issue, but probably less significant. Nobody's getting raped in the sports debate. But the argument is that if a person has gone through their natal puberty, particularly male puberty, and they've had the experience of testosterone, right? If you've gone and you're already 25 now, you've had the full effects of puberty. You had full male puberty by your 20s. This results in denser bones, a bigger heart, bigger hands, bigger muscle, a thicker skull, a bigger amygdala, a more refined cerebellum. Now, women have a different set of criteria, advantages and disadvantages as well. But in terms of physical strength, men have benefited a lot from male puberty. So if a person has fully been through male puberty and now they identify as a woman, you can't undo male puberty. Once it's been done, you have the benefits. For better or worse, you do. Now, if a person is one of the new generation of transgender people and they went on hormone blockers at 12 years old and they never went through their natal puberty, that would be a different situation in terms of sports because they didn't have the advantage of testosterone during puberty, right? If you never went through the puberty, you don't have an advantage, right? Basically, there's very little advantage. So this matters, right? When did you transition, right? This matters, right? After you've been a male for 30 years or before, right? This matters. There's also exceptions. So people like Schuler-Baylor was female, identifies as male. This is a picture of Schuler, who's very popular on social media. He ranked in the men's division as in the top 13% of college athletes, a Harvard graduate. Right? So it's very unusual, though, that a female moves to men as a male and excels in male sports. Right? We would typically say, good for him. It's not, but he did not have a biological advantage at swimming by being a female. Probably, I don't think so. And if he would have competed in the women's division, he would have done very well as well, right? Because men typically swim faster than women on average, right? So he would have done very well as a woman, and he did very well in the men's division, right? So point that out for full transparency, but that's unusual. It is unusual. In the Olympics, we just had the Olympics, but in 2004, they made it so that transgender people could be in the Olympics, although it wasn't really on the radar. It's only every 4 years. So this isn't something that had become much of an issue until this last Olympics. So there are a set of criteria. You have to be legally a member of your gender, right? You have to have legally transitioned. This is gatekeeping, right? Gatekeeping. They must be on hormone replacement for at least 1 year before they have competed, although surgery is not needed. You saw this in this last one, a runner, female, and you could see male genitalia going through the spandex, and you go, the person who does so well in women's division has a penis, right? But the male genitalia doesn't actually give you any advantage. The hormones, so they are good scientifically on that one, right? And then lastly, the female sports testosterone level must be within a range, right? There's a range of norms that you have to fall within for testosterone. We have people like Laurel Hubbard, who was the weightlifter in 2021 Tokyo Games, the first trans person to qualify for the Olympics, and she lost. But as it was pointed out, this person, male to female, if you look at the person, the person, if they were in the men's division, they wouldn't even have qualified, right? The person is a fairly, I know this sounds awful, but fairly out of shape. If he was to compete in the men's division, a fairly out of shape man, right? The advantage he has of his male physique is that he's able to place within the women's division, but in the men's division, he wouldn't even had the slightest shot, right? But I think eventually it's only going to be a matter of time before there is a transgender, that this will affect the Olympics more. It just hasn't yet. We'll see, right? I don't know. The Olympics is not the end of the world. This isn't the biggest issue. You have people, usually the issue is male to female. Athletes like Rachel Mckinnon, who also goes by Veronica Ivy. I don't know why she has two names, but she does. But she's a cyclist, and she won the gold medal in 2018 in the Women's World Championship in Los Angeles, and again in 2019 in Manchester. So 2 years in a row, she won the gold medal. And obviously quite a bit of criticism, being like, well, you just transitioned to be a woman. You have a male physique, all the advantage of male hormones, and now you're a woman, and you come in gold. You always win the gold prize every time you compete. Well, could it be because your body is male? Could that have something to do with it? I have not talked to Dr. Mckinnon. I would not be opposed to it, but I feel somewhat intimidated by Dr. Mckinnon, to be honest, because whenever she's tweeting or she's writing things, she's very confrontational. Like the tweet, I have yet to meet a real champion who has a problem with trans women. Real champions want stronger competition. If you win because of bigotry, got you your competition banned, you're a loser, and also that debate is over. You lost. Very aggressive, right? The posts are often very aggressive, and I think that's why I've been hesitant to kind of reach out. But yeah, I think if you were a woman competing, you could say, well, this doesn't quite seem fair. Like, I think the discussion is not over. I don't think the debate is over. I don't know. Rachel Mckinnon would not be a gold medalist if she were racing in the men's division, but in the women's division, she is. So it's a tough one, right? Right. And it seems like you can just have rules, right? You can say yes or no, right? But if you say you can allow trans women into women's competitions, you are essentially going to undo women's competitions. But somebody like Mary Gregory, in the picture in the bottom, was a weightlifter and won 9 competitions in 2019, the 100% Raw Lifting Federation competition, and broke world championships in the process. But as you can probably see from the picture, she looks very male. Except for the hair, you probably would assume a male. This wrestling federation took the medal back. They said, they took it back, saying, well, this is for people who are natal born female. You are not. To Mary Gregory's defense in this, when she came in and you sign in, you say your name and who knows what other information, but male or female. And she said female, which she identifies as a female. She did not lie. They didn't ask if she were trans. They came up with this policy after she had won. So in her defense, I don't think anyone's taking advantage of it. It's just they need to have policies, right? If they would have made that policy before, they could have saved Mary the embarrassment of winning and then taking it back. But there's clearly there might not be a strong advantage to being a male when it comes to the breaststroke, but there definitely seems to be an advantage to being male with weightlifting, right? The other one is MMA, or the martial arts competitions. This one is recently very debated, right? The first one of these was Fallon Fox between 2012 and 2014. She won 5 out of 6 professional martial arts competitions. This is Fallon Fox in the bottom right. And I give a lot of credit to the one female who did beat her. Fallon won, cracking the skull of her opponent, which, if we want to talk about fairness, there are a lot of cracked skulls within the MMA competitions, even when you don't have a transgender competitor. So you don't want to over-exaggerate. He cracked her skull open. It happens a lot, actually. But it's still significant, right? A woman had her head broken in by somebody who has the body of a man. That's significant. When you transition and then you win every competition, you can't help but think, did the transitioning have something to do with it? Is the fact that I'm a biological male, might that have anything to do with it? Because before, I wasn't placing at all as a man, but now as a woman, I'm winning every competition. And when people say, well, I'm happier now that I've transitioned so I can compete better. Maybe. Who am I to say whether or not that's possible? It's possible. But the muscle strength might also be part of it as well, right? There are other biological elements that are part of it as well. And then the one that's most recent is the Alana McLaughlin, which is in the bottom left here, which just happened since the book came out, so it's not in my book. But you have, this is Alan in the Special Forces, and then Alan became Alana. And really, when you see her next to the female competition, the muscles and everything, it's just like, it's kind of clearly a male body versus a woman body, and it appears not to be a fair fight when you just look at it on its surface. Now, you might notice when you're looking at this, it might be slightly unrelated to this exact topic, but if you see this image of Alana as Alan, all the macho gear, all the macho-ness, the muscles, head thing, the sunglasses, the beard, everything. You see this, and it's kind of an interesting thing, right? This gets into chapter 6 with Blanchard, and I know so far the most criticisms I've had now on my book has been the inclusion of Blanchard, Ray Blanchard, and I think he's got to be, Ray Blanchard's onto something. I don't see how you can get around it. This person is autogynephilic, and if you don't know what that means, we get to it in chapter 6, but it's a heterosexual type transgender person. This person is clearly autogynephilic, right? The problem was not that he felt like a woman. I know this sounds awfully judgmental. See, with Fallon Fox, I can't really tell. I don't know Fallon Fox. But for the Alana McLaughlin, it's quite clear that she doesn't feel uncomfortable with masculinity, because why would you grow out a beard, right? Why would you take on all of the masculine attributes? This is a tough guy. Why would you go all that way and then be like, no, actually, I'm a feminine woman? It's autogynephilia, which is you're attracted to females, you're attracted to women, you're attracted to the female physique, and you've internalized it in a way. That's the idea of autogynephilia, and it does seem to fit. The androphilic, they would be people who would be from an early age, like especially like a boy who's androphilic, so girly that everybody growing up knows that the kid is either gay or transgender, right? Because they always act like a woman from the youngest age, right? And likewise, male to female, right? A female to male. Little girl always acted like a boy, right? This is androphilic. This is not, nobody would say, well, he always acted like a girl. He always seemed like a girl with me. He had that woman, he had the feminine essence about him. Nope. Right? Feminine essence is not there, right? This would be autogynephilic, which we'll get into later on. Fallon Fox, I'm not sure. I'd have to watch more on Fallon Fox and to know. Now, this sports debate also leads to people like poor Castor Semenya, who is a biological cis woman, meaning not transgender. She's not transgender. She's a natural woman, right? Has estrogen. She has ovaries. She has a female morphology. Presumably, she could give birth to children within her body. She is a woman. But she has naturally high levels of testosterone, which might affect her fertility. But she has naturally high levels of testosterone, and they have excluded her from competition because of her testosterone being too high. But her testosterone is just at her natural level as a woman, right? It's above regular women, but there are people who have abnormal hormones. So she has normally high testosterone. The court has ordered that she must take hormone blockers to reduce her level of natural testosterone. And she appealed, but the court said, nope, seems fair enough, right? We have these standards. The standards are you have to have this range of testosterone. Well, this can be upsetting because why do we even have those rules about natural levels of testosterone? Well, it's because transgender people in female sports. So here, a natural woman is told she needs to take hormone blockers to be a natural woman when she is a natural woman, right? And people have pointed out this would be like saying, well, if you're some sports, being tall is an advantage, like basketball. Well, if you're too tall, you can't be in it. Well, great basketball players are too tall, and if you're naturally born tall, you have a natural advantage, and that's just the way sports work, right? There's a lot of sports no matter how hard I work, I would never be a very good member of the sport just because my body is not physically big enough to be an active competitor in it. Well, that's just the luck of the draw, right? It's the genetic lottery. Her genetic lottery was higher levels of testosterone, but here we are saying is, you need to reduce it because we don't accept your natural biology. And I think it's a bit of a kick in the rear end when the reason why we have this rule is because males who identify as female want to be in your sport, so therefore you have to be you have to medically alter yourself to fit the mold. I think that is a bit insulting, I think. And lastly is the high school sports one, where this becomes more relevant to people, I think. If somebody can be in the Olympics or not in the Olympics, really I don't care. I don't even watch the Olympics, right? That's probably true for a lot of people, right? Do you care about weightlifting competitions? Not really. But high school sports is more relevant because a lot of good high school athletes are really aiming at getting on sports teams and getting scholarships to the school of their dream because college is so expensive. Well, in this track competition, running competition, Terry Miller and Adria Yearwood were male who identify as female, but they're not on any hormones. They're not. They haven't medically transitioned. They're in high school, but because of this, they've won 15 of the women's championship titles, and they've taken 85 opportunity to opportunities to participate in higher level competitions from female track athletes between 2017 and 2019. And female athletes have sued, and the court has been thrown out because the judge says, well, you have no standing, right? If that person was not in the competition, who knows if you would have even placed, therefore you can't sue based on a hypothetical. But I think, again, when we're trying to find reasonableness, I think we think this is not reasonable, to be honest. Because why do we have male sports and female sports? Why don't we just have a track team, one track team per school that has all the males and all the females in the same team? Well, because men run much faster than women, and no women would ever place. So because women wouldn't place, it wouldn't be very fun to be a female athlete. So then you would just end up having you would only have male sports, right? For the majority of sports, they would all be male sports, which wouldn't be very fun for females, right? They might want to compete too, even though they can't compete with the men. They still like to play, right? It's not all about winning. Which is why we have female sports teams, right? That's why they exist. But once men are able to be in female sports leagues, now you've just eliminated female sports again, or made it so it's not fun, right? If you're on the league and you allow a certain amount of people with male bodies in, and they keep winning all the competitions, well, that's not very fun, right? If it's about fun. And unlike the Olympics, where, well, you have to legally transition, you have to be transitioned for 1 year, you have to have certain testosterone levels, but be below certain testosterone levels. This is like, well, just identify as a female. Well, you're talking about a 100% male body with male hormones competing against girls. Whether they identify as transgender or not makes absolutely no difference in terms of competitions that are dealing with bodies, not minds, right? This goes back to the phenomenal versus noumenal. Female sports leagues exist because of bodily differences between men and women, not differences in the minds between men and women, right? The mind does not matter in track, right? How you identify does not matter, right, at all when it comes to track or bodybuilding or martial arts, right? It does not matter if you are, if you have the identity of a African American, an identity of a Latino, an identity of a woman, an identity of a Martian, right? It doesn't matter what your identity is. How fast can you run? How high can you jump? Right? This is a bodily question. So this becomes a bit unfair. And if we're looking at fairness, it should be fairly dependent upon the body when it comes to sports, right? What puberty have you gone through, and what is your body like? That seems to be the fairest standard. Go back to prisons, probably segregated prisons for trans people would be the safest option. And if we go back to the bathroom debate, segregated bathrooms for anybody who wants to have privacy would make some sense. But also gatekeeping. You can't just identify and do whatever you want. There probably needs to be some type of gatekeeping. And that's probably true for all of these. Okay, this has gone on for quite a long time. So I will end it here. And next I will be moving on into living stones, which is who in the church is doing good work among transgender people, and who can we give them a pat on the back. Okay, that's all I have.